She's a nobody, gentlemen. Some admin clerk they parked at my desk. Sergeant First Class Dwight Pruitt said it loud enough for the whole bay to hear, coffee steaming in his fist, and he said it with a smile. Stamp the forms, sweetheart, and leave the wrenches to the people who understand them. The woman at the logbook desk did not look up. She turned a page. Her thumb found a torque entry 3 lines down and stopped on it, the way a reader stops on a lie. The motor pool ran 200 feet deep under a corrugated roof, roll-up doors thrown open to a July morning, and a yard full of dead vehicles. 14 of 26 deadlined, down hard. A battalion movement in 9 days, and not one mechanic in the shop could tell you why. The air smelled of gear oil and hot brake cleaner and the particular sweetness of a diesel that would not start. Somewhere in the back, a compressor kicked on and ran and shut off, and nobody moved to use it because there was nothing left to do to 14 trucks that no one could fix. Pruitt owned all of it. 20 years in, a shop that gleamed, a line of young mechanics who laughed when he laughed and went quiet when he went quiet. He had walked into work that morning to find a stranger in plain gray coveralls sitting at his control desk with a stack of maintenance jackets, no rank on her collar, no name tape, sleeves buttoned to the wrist. He had decided who she was in the time it took to cross the floor. "You hearing me?" he said. "Records room's in the back. That's your lane. Somebody upstairs decides my bay needs another clipboard. Fine. But the clipboard stays out of my bay. I hear you, Sergeant." Her voice was low and even, and it had no fight in it, which was somehow worse. She did not stop reading. He liked that even less than an argument. An argument he could win in front of his people. Silence he could not win at all. He gave her the tour then, the one he gave inspectors and colonels, and anyone he wanted to put in their place. A wall of nomenclature poured out fast, so the listener drowned in it. Final drives and torque values, contamination limits, oil analysis flags, the whole liturgy of a maintenance shop, delivered over his shoulder as he walked her past the deadlined line without once slowing down for her to catch up. Final drive failures mostly. Way above your pay grade, he said. You probably wouldn't know a torque wrench from a curling iron. She stopped at the third vehicle, laid a flat palm against the final drive housing, went still. Master Sergeant Gil Ambrose watched her from the control desk. Ambrose had buried 2 wars and a marriage in this bay. 54 years old, hands like tree roots, a man who had stopped being surprised by anything sometime around the second deployment. He watched the way the stranger's palm settled on the steel and did not move, the way her eyes went unfocused and her head tilted a half degree, listening to a thing that made no sound. He knew the difference between a person reading paperwork and a person hunting. She was hunting. Procedure said 90 foot-pounds, the woman said, to no one in particular. Somebody's been pulling it to 140. Pruitt laughed. Somebody. Right. And you got that off a logbook, did you? I got it off the housing, she said. The logbook only confirmed it. He didn't have an answer for that, so he kept walking, and she turned another page in the jacket she still carried, and her thumb stopped again on another line. Ambrose had seen hands like that exactly twice in 30 years, and both times they had belonged to people the Army did not put on posters. Specialist Nolan Frey, 22 years old and 3 months into the shop, drifted toward her, curious the way young mechanics are curious about anybody who touches a machine like they mean it. Pruitt called him back without looking. Frey went, but he looked over his shoulder once, and he saw the woman's palm still flat on the steel, and he filed it away. The woman closed the last logbook, set it square with the edge of the desk, corners flush, a small, unconscious precision, the habit of someone who had spent a life in places where a thing out of place could get a person killed. It's not the vehicles, she said quietly. Pruitt laughed again. Ambrose didn't. By mid-morning, she had a torque wrench on the bench and 3 calibration slips fanned out beside it. She had not asked permission. That was the first thing Pruitt noticed when he came back through. The stranger at his torque bench, running his shop's reference wrench against a certified standard, her hands moving with an economy that made the tool look like an extension of her wrist. Click. Reset. Click. Reset. No wasted motion, no fumbling, no second guessing. She read the standard, read the wrench, and set it down like a doctor setting down a chart. Your reference wrench is lying to you by 14%, she said. It reads low. That means every drive your shop torqued on it for the last month went out over spec. Over torque cracks the seals. Cracked seals let grit into the gear oil. Contaminated oil eats the final drive from the inside. Slow. And it looks like 14 separate part failures, when it's actually one number, one wrench, repeated 14 times. That is your deadline, Sergeant. It's not the parts. It was never the parts. The bay had gone a little quiet. The compressor did not kick on. Pruitt felt the ground move under him, and he did not like the feeling. So he did what proud men do when the ground moves. He got angry instead of grateful. You don't walk into my bay, he said, slow and cold, each word set down like a tool, and rewrite my shop. I've been turning wrenches since before that specialist could read. We order the parts, we replace the drives, we make the movement. That's how it's done. You'll replace 14 drives and torque them on the same wrench, she said, and in a month you'll be replacing them again. But it's your shop. She held out the slip. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm just reading it to you. He didn't take it. Ambrose did. The master sergeant ran the calibration himself, twice, the way a man checks a thing he is afraid to believe, and both times the wrench read 14% low against the standard. He set it down very carefully, the way you set down something that turns out to be loaded. He looked at the woman in the coveralls like he was seeing the second half of a sentence he had started a long time ago and never finished. Where'd you learn to read a drive by hand? He asked. By feel, off the housing. Somewhere that didn't have time to be wrong twice, she said. Out in the yard, Frey quietly pulled the flagged wrench off the line and set it in the far corner of the bench, where no one would grab it by habit. A small thing. Nobody told him to. He was the first person in the bay to move on her word, and he did it without deciding to, the way you flinch from a hot stove. Pruitt watched the calibration slip in Ambrose's hand and felt every mechanic in the shop watching him. He took the slip, folded it once, and slid it into his breast pocket like a thing he could bury. We work the fleet the way we've always worked it, he told the bay, loud enough to reset the room. We order parts. Back to it. Show's over. The mechanics went back to it. Ambrose watched the slip disappear into the pocket and said nothing. Not yet. The next morning, Pruitt drew a line and dared the shop to cross it. He held a short formation in the bay before the doors were up, the whole shop in a loose horseshoe, and he reassigned the woman to the records room. Fling. We don't need a visitor telling 20 years of mechanics how to hold a wrench, he said. And he did not raise his voice, and he did not curse, and he never once touched her. He just built a wall out of words and put her on the far side of it. She counts paper. We fix trucks. Anybody confused about which of those matters is welcome to come see me in my office. Nobody came to see him. That was the thing about a shop that loved its sergeant. Loyalty is a good thing, right up until it points the wrong way. And then, it is the strongest wrong thing in the world. In the records room, alone, the woman built a page. She did not build a complaint. She built a fault tree. One clean diagram, bad reference wrench to over-torque, to seal failure to contamination to deadline, with the specific bumper numbers and the specific dates, cross-referenced line by line to the logbook entries. She photographed each page with her phone, methodical, one after another, backing up her work the way she had learned to back up everything, because paper burns and phones break, and the truth needs more than one place to live. She was not preparing to argue. She was preparing an answer so complete that when the question finally came, and she knew it would come, it would already be sitting on the desk, finished, waiting. She did not argue. Arguing was noise. She built the page instead. Out in the bay, 2 mechanics retorqued a drive to 140 on Pruitt's, standing say-so, joking about the clerk in the back who thought she ran the place. Ambrose stopped them, quietly, without contradicting the sergeant out loud in front of the shop, finding a reason to pull that vehicle for a second look before the bad number could kill another drive. He did not announce it. He just found a reason. He was protecting her work without letting himself admit that was what he was doing. At the end of the day, Frey brought her a coffee in the records room, set it down, embarrassed, and stood there a second too long, working up to something. "That wrench," he said finally. "The one you flagged. It's been off since before I got here. I think everybody kind of knew, or half knew, and nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Because saying it meant somebody had to have missed it. For a long time." "I know," she said. "That's usually how it works. Thank you for the coffee, specialist." He nodded and left, and at the door he stopped, and almost said something else, and didn't, and went. If it makes your jaw tighten to watch the one person in the room who is right get sent to the back to count paper, if you have ever been the one who was right and was told to stay in your lane and stayed there because making noise would only have proved them right about you, then you already understand why this channel exists. Subscribe to Honor Tales. These are stories for the people who were written off by the ones who should have known better and who did not have to raise their voice to be proven right. On the records desk, the fault tree page sat finished, squared to the edge, waiting. Pruitt formalized the freeze-out the way small men do, on paper. He drafted a memo in his office that evening, requesting that the civilian records augmentee be reassigned out of his motor pool for interfering with established shop procedures and disrupting the good order of the maintenance section. There was no planted contraband in it, no forged evidence, no crime invented out of whole cloth to bury her. It was a petty, honest, entirely plausible gripe. A proud sergeant asking his chain to remove an outsider who was making his bay look bad in front of his own people. He believed every word of it as he typed it. He believed, all the way down, that he was protecting his shop from a distraction, and that belief is exactly what made him dangerous to himself. "I want her gone before the movement," he said aloud to the empty office, reading it back. "She's a distraction my bay can't afford." He routed it up the chain and hit send, and he slept fine that night, which is the tragedy of it. The memo climbed, and every desk it crossed, someone read the name it was written against, and the temperature in the room dropped a degree. A battalion admin clerk stopped scrolling, went still, and did not drop it into the routine stack. She stood up instead and walked it, physically walked it, printed in her hand. 2 floors up to an office where such requests did not normally go, and set it in front of a sergeant major who read the first 3 lines and closed his eyes and set his own coffee down without drinking any of it. Pruitt did not know any of that. He had authored an honest complaint and mailed it straight up a chain that knew something he did not. And the thing about mailing your certainty up a chain like that is that it comes back down as weather. In the records room, the woman retorqued a single seized final drive by hand to prove the fix could be done. She broke it loose, cleaned the contamination out with a patience that looked almost like tenderness, set a fresh seal, and pulled it to 90 foot-pounds exactly. No wrench she trusted, just the calibrated memory living in her own wrist. The number she could feel the way other people feel a wrong note in a song. 10 minutes, start to finish. The thing the shop had not managed in 3 weeks. Ambrose stood in the doorway and watched her do it, and he understood that he was looking at a level of the trade he had heard about in stories and had never once seen with his own eyes. He made a quiet call that night, not to accuse anyone of anything, just to make sure the right officer walked the shop before the movement, and to make sure that when he did, he walked it slow. Pruitt, driving home, felt a flicker of something that was not quite doubt, but lived in the same house as doubt. The clerk had stayed too calm. In 20 years, he had learned that people who were genuinely out of their depth did not stay that calm. They flailed. They name-dropped. They asked to speak to somebody. She had done none of it. She had just kept building her page. In the records room, the woman closed her laptop over a photograph she never showed anyone. A Valor citation, 19 years old, with her name at the top of it. The bay lights clicked off one bank at a time, and the shop went dark, and the 14 dead vehicles sat in the yard, under the sodium lights, like patients waiting on a surgeon who had not been allowed into the room yet. Tomorrow, the general would walk the shop. After hours, Ambrose found her reshelving torque references she had recalibrated, on her own time, off the clock, because a lie in a reference tool was the kind of thing that kept her up. He did not ask her rank. He had decided, somewhere in the last 2 days, that her rank was not the interesting question about her. He asked the interesting one instead. Which unit taught you to read a drive by hand? By feel, no wrench. I've seen maybe one man in my life do that clean, and he was not a man you could find on any roster I was ever allowed to look at. She slid the last reference into place and squared it to its neighbors. You already know, she said, or you wouldn't be asking after dark, with the doors down and nobody around to hear the answer. There's only one shop that trains hands like that, Ambrose said, and his voice dropped to almost nothing. I always heard that unit didn't exist, not on paper, not anywhere a man could point to. It doesn't, she said. He set his coffee down on the bench and did not pick it back up. He went to Pruitt after that, carefully, loyally. He did not break her cover, because it was not his to break, but he told his sergeant the plain truth as far as he was allowed to carry it. Pull the memo, Dwight. Whatever you think she is, you've got it wrong. And being wrong about this one is going to cost you a lot more than a deadline. I'm asking you as a friend. Pull it back tonight. Pruitt heard it as the old man going soft. 20 years of friendship, and he heard sentiment where there was a warning. She counts paper, Gil, he said. I don't know why you've got a soft spot for her, but let it go. I'm telling you, for your own sake. Let it go, Gil. Ambrose let it go. There is only so far one man can carry another man who has decided not to be carried, and Ambrose had carried plenty of men who did not make it, and he knew the exact weight at which you have to set a person down and let them walk into the thing themselves. In the failing light, the woman walked the dead-lined line one more time, palm to each housing, reading them the way a doctor reads charts on evening rounds. She marked 3 vehicles in grease pencil that could roll by morning if the shop stopped fighting her and started helping. Then she found Frey wiping down the last bench, staying late because he did not have anywhere better to be, and because the shop felt like the first place that had ever wanted him. Chief, he started, then stopped, because he did not know she was a chief. He only knew that the word fit her better than any other word he had. Ma'am, would you teach me to read one the way you do? Tomorrow, she said, if there's still a shop to do it in. If you want to know what that mark on her arm is, the one Master Sergeant Ambrose is afraid to say out loud, the one this whole story has been quietly walking toward from the first line, you are already closer to the answer than anyone standing in that bay. Subscribe and stay to the end, because when the general sees it, you will see it at the exact same moment, and you will understand why a sergeant's whole career is about to turn on a patch of ink. She pulled her sleeve down over her forearm. Headlights swept across the yard and stopped. Command was coming. For the first time, the story steps back out of the motor pool and into her memory, and only you get to go there with her. 2007. She was 30 years old, a chief warrant officer. 2. A recovery technician with a support squadron whose name did not appear in any press release and never would. A convoy pinned on a road that ran along a dry wadi in a country a long way from any motor pool. A lead vehicle disabled and burning down with its crew still inside. The doors jammed shut by the same blast that had killed the engine. Recovery doctrine said, wait. Wait for the area to be secure. Wait for the fire to lift. Wait for the situation to develop. The book said wait for the area to be secure. The book had never been the 4 men inside a vehicle that was cooking. She went. She ran the winch line herself, out in the open, on her feet in a place where being on your feet was a decision with a short life expectancy, hooking a disabled 16-ton vehicle while the air came apart around her. And Sergeant Ray Mercer put himself and a base of fire between her and the wadi so that she could work. 26 years old, Mercer, with a laugh you could hear clear across a motor pool, and a wife back home who was 6 months along with a daughter he would never meet. He held the line so she could pull it. He made himself the wall so she could be the hands. "Get 'em out, Joe," he called over the noise. "I got the line. You just get 'em out." She got them out. She dragged the burning vehicle and the 4 men trapped inside it back behind the cover of the second truck. And then she went back into the smoke a second time. Alone, because the cable had fouled on the hookup, and there was no one else who could clear it fast enough to matter. She cleared it, and in the last 30 seconds, the very last 30 seconds, with the vehicle already moving, with everyone already all but clear, Ray Mercer was killed covering that hookup. He never saw it coming, and he never let go of the line. The 4 men who lived through it included a first lieutenant named Everett Landry, 31 years old, burned along one arm from wrist to shoulder and stunned half to deafness by the blast, who watched a warrant officer he had never met in his life crawl back into fire a second time for people she did not know and would never see again. He caught at her sleeve as she moved past him toward the next casualty down the line. "Who are you?" he said, and his voice cracked on it. "Ma'am, who are you?" She was already moving. She did not answer. There was a gunner 40 feet up the road who needed her hands more than a burned lieutenant needed her name, and names could wait, and names did not save anyone. And she had learned a long time before that the people who stopped to be thanked were the people who got other people killed. Afterward, when the squadron inked the unit crest into the skin of the ones who had earned it, she added 2 small letters beside it, low on the inside of the forearm, where a rolled sleeve would always hide them. RM, the Valor citation came in the mail months later, forwarded twice, creased. She read it once, standing in a hallway, and she put it in a drawer, and never framed it, and never hung it, because the thing the citation described was not a victory to her. It was the price of 4 lives, and the price had a name, and the name had a daughter. Present day. 0600. She buttoned her coveralls over the crest and the 2 small letters, the way she had every morning for 19 years. And across the post, in a house with 2 stars on a plaque by the door, a major general pinned on a plain patrol cap with no rank, showing and told his aide he wanted to see the motor pool himself. No announcement, no advance party, no phone calls ahead. "I read the deadline report twice," he said. 14 vehicles down, and nobody can tell me why. I want to see the shop with my own eyes before I believe a word of it. 2 people who had last stood together in the same fire, on the same road, 19 years and half a world away, were now 9 days and 1 motor pool apart. And neither of them knew it yet. The morning of the walkthrough, Pruitt found her fault tree page pinned to the shopboard. Someone had put it up. Maybe Frey. Maybe Ambrose. Maybe one of the mechanics who had started, quietly, to wonder. It was pinned right there on the board, where the whole shop read the day's work orders. One clean diagram that explained 3 weeks of failure in a single glance, and every mechanic who walked past it that morning slowed down to look at it, and understood it, and looked at the deadlined line differently after. And Pruitt saw his people reading it, saw them nodding, saw the thing he had torn down in his own mind being built back up on his own board, by his own shop, and something in him that had nothing at all to do with trucks came loose. He crossed the bay, pulled the page down off the board, and tore it in half. Out, he told her, and this time the whole shop heard it, and the whole shop stopped moving. You're a nobody in my bay, and I am done saying it politely. Take your paper, and go count something somewhere that isn't my motor pool. This is a maintenance shop. It is not for you. He did not touch her. He never once touched her. He just tore the page down the middle and pointed at the open door, in front of every single mechanic in the shop, on the exact morning the commanding general was coming to see the fleet. "Okay, Sergeant," she said, and she bent down and picked up the 2 torn halves of her page off the concrete and squared them together, corners flush, tear matched to tear. And then she did the one thing she had not done a single time in 3 days. She smiled at him. It was not a cruel smile. It was almost kind. And that was what made it terrible. And Ambrose, across the bay, felt the hair stand straight up on his arms, because in 3 days he had learned to read her stillness, and now he was learning to read her smile. And the smile meant she had stopped waiting. It meant she had decided, finally, to let the truth do the work. And the truth was already crossing the yard on a general's boots. Ambrose moved to the roll-up door, not to stop Pruitt, to make sure the door stayed open, because he could hear boots on the apron now, a small staff moving with purpose across the yard, and one voice among them that he half recognized from a briefing a month before. He put a hand on Frey's shoulder. "Watch," he said, very low. "Whatever happens in the next 2 minutes, don't you dare miss a second of it." A shadow filled the roll-up door. An aide's voice cut across the whole bay, crisp and carrying. "Sergeant, the commanding general." Pruitt spun and straightened, and his whole face rearranged itself into the one thing he was truly best at. He filled his lungs to render the bay to attention, proud, upright in his absolute element, certain down to the soles of his boots that this was his morning, his shop, his moment to shine in front of the man with the stars on his cap. He had no idea the general was not looking at him at all. Major General Everett Landry stepped into the bay, and his eyes swept once down the deadlined line of vehicles, and stopped. Not on the vehicles. On the woman in the plain gray coveralls standing by the door, her sleeve pushed up from folding a torn page, the unit crest, bare and plain, on the inside of her forearm in the flat morning light. The general went rigid, not at attention, deeper than attention. It was the stillness of a man who has just seen the one thing in the world he had stopped ever expecting to see again. His eyes went to the crest on her arm, and then to her face, and then back to the crest, and 19 years fell away in the space of a single-held breath. The wadi, the smoke, the winch line paying out under fire, the warrant officer who came back the second time. "That crest," Landry said. And his voice was not a general's voice anymore. It was the voice of a 31-year-old lieutenant on a burning road. "I spent 19 years looking for the hands that wore it. Nobody would tell me the name. Nobody would even tell me the unit." The Bay did not understand yet. Pruitt did not understand yet. He stood at the front of his own shop with his mouth still half open on the order he had been about to bark, watching the commanding general of the division walk straight past him as if he were an empty tool bench bolted to the floor. Landry stopped in front of the woman in the coveralls. "Chief Warrant Officer Marsh," he said, "you dragged my vehicle out of the wadi in 2007. You pulled 4 of us out of a fire, and then you went back into it a second time for the hookup when the cable fouled, and you never once gave me your name. I grabbed your sleeve. I asked you twice. You wouldn't stop moving. You had a burn that needed a medic a great deal more than you needed to know my name, sir," Joe Marsh said. "And there was a gunner up the road worse off than you." Landry turned, then to the frozen bay, and he did not raise his voice, because a man who has been that still does not need to. "This," he said, "is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Marsh. Your incoming Command Chief Warrant Officer, reporting in 1 day early. She has forgotten more about these vehicles than this entire shop will learn in a career, and every one of you is fortunate beyond your understanding to have her walk through that door. I would not be standing in this motor pool this morning, or any motor pool on any morning, without the woman your sergeant just called a nobody." And Pruitt's face began to move. Pride first. He was still half in the posture of rendering honors, spine straight, chin up, waiting for the general's eyes to finally land on him and approve of his clean shop. Then confusion, as the general's words refused, again and again, to fit into the morning he had built in his head. Then disbelief, cold and slow as gear oil in winter. The clerk, the nobody, the woman he had sent to the back to count paper. Then recognition, as every single thing he had said to her over 3 days came back and replayed itself behind his eyes in her calm, even, unbothered voice. And then, at the very end, horror, pure and total and quiet. Landry looked at him, at the torn fault tree page still lying in 2 halves on the floor between them, and he said it quietly, almost gently, which was so much worse than if he had shouted it across the bay. "Son, you don't know who she is?" Pruitt could not answer. There was, in the whole language, no answer to that question that would not end him, and they both knew it, and so did every mechanic in the shop. Ambrose, unable to help himself any longer, came to attention. Frey followed a half-second behind him, and then it rippled down the line. Not on an order, not called by anyone, nobody said a word. Just mechanic after mechanic coming to attention, one after another, because they had each decided to. Because there are some things a body does a full second before the mind has caught all the way up to why. "As you were," Joe said, before it could finish traveling down the line. Even, almost impatient. "As you were, all of you. We have 14 vehicles down, and 9 days to a movement. That is the emergency in this building. I am not the emergency. The fleet is." They stood down, slowly, uncertainly, the way men do when they have been told to relax in the middle of something that does not feel like a moment for relaxing. Landry waited. Everyone in the bay waited. The whole shop braced together for the hammer to come down on the sergeant who had torn a command chief warrant officer's work off the wall and called her a nobody in front of his people on the morning of the general's visit. It was owed. Every soul in that building could feel in their chest that it was owed, and that it would be swift, and that it would be total. Joe bent down instead. She picked up the 2 torn halves of her fault tree page off the concrete, set them together on the nearest workbench, corners flush, and smoothed the tear flat with the side of her hand, twice, the way you smooth something you intend to keep. She said nothing at all yet. Landry watched her do it, and something in his face eased, because he had known her for exactly 1 fire and 1 morning 19 years apart, and on both of those days, she had done the harder thing instead of the louder one. "Chief," he said from the door, settling his patrol cap back onto his head. "The fleet is yours. So is the shop." A beat. It is very good to finally know your name. and he left. And Sergeant First Class Dwight Pruitt stood alone in the wreckage of his own morning, waiting for the end of his career to arrive, as Joe Marsh turned to face him with the taped-together page in her hand, and did not fire the shot he was braced with his whole body to receive. The reckoning was not a court-martial. It was the harder thing, which is the only kind of reckoning worth telling a story about. Joe held out the Faltree page, the one he had torn, the one she had just smoothed back together, and she made him take it, pressed it into his hands until his fingers closed on it. "Here is where we are, Sergeant," she said. "Your bay is clean. Your standards are real. Your people are trained, and they are loyal. And loyalty like that does not grow in a bad shop. It grows because somewhere along the line you taught it to. You were wrong about exactly one thing in 3 days, and the one thing was me, and your pride made you deaf to a 14% number that a specialist, 3 months in the door, had already half worked out on his own." Pruitt held the page. His hands were not steady, and he did not try to hide it, which was the first honest thing his body had done in 3 days. "You're going to write me up," he said. It was not a question. It was a man reading his own sentence off a wall. "No," she said. "I am not going to end you, Sergeant. I am going to use you." She let that sit in the air between them until it changed shape. "There is no memo. There are no charges. There is no investigation, and there is not going to be one. I do not need you gone. I need your shop discipline without your pride, and I happen to believe a man your age can learn to keep the first and set down the second if somebody gives him one real reason to. So here is your choice, and it is a real choice, not a trick. Help me fix this fleet, starting right now, the right way, in front of your people. Or transfer out by Friday, record clean, no story following you to your next shop. Your call. But understand, if you stay as a man who learns from the clerk." "Why?" Pruitt said. It came out cracked down the middle. "After all of it, after everything I said." "Why?" Joe pushed her sleeve all the way up, turned her forearm so that he could see the crest, and the 2 small letters inked low beside it. "Because a man named Ray Mercer shielded a winch line with his own body," she said, "so that I could pull 4 people out of a fire. He was loud too, Sergeant. Loud as you. Louder. He had a laugh you could hear across a motor pool, and a temper, and a wife 6 months along, and he was worth 10 quiet men, and he knew it, and he was right. I don't waste people, not even the loud ones, especially not the loud ones who might still turn into something if somebody bothers to stay long enough to find out. Now," she lowered the sleeve, "do you want to fix your fleet or not?" Pruitt looked down at the page in his hands for a long moment. The bay was silent around them. Then he took a breath, and it shook the whole way in, and he said, "Where do we start, Chief?" They started with the wrenches, every torque wrench in the shop, off the line and against the certified standard, one at a time, the bad ones tagged red and pulled and set aside. Every final drive that had been torqued on the 14% wrench, broken down, cleaned of contamination, resealed, and pulled to 90 foot-pounds exactly. No more, no less. Joe ran the first 3 herself, at the bench, in front of everyone, narrating each step in that low, even voice, and the shop watched her hands, and then the shop began to copy her hands. Pruitt ran the line the way it should have been run from the beginning, hard on the standard, hard on the procedure, harder on himself than on anyone. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the deadline numbers started to fall instead of climb. 14 became 12. 12 became 9. Ambrose at the control desk watched it happen and finally let himself grin, one corner of his mouth, the most a man like Ambrose ever gives away. He crossed the bay once, near the end of the afternoon, and stood beside Joe at the bench, while the fourth drive came apart, clean under her hands. He did not say anything about the crest, or the unit, or the thing he had guessed in the dark 2 nights before. He just handed her the seal driver before she reached for it, the way a man hands a tool to someone he has finally decided to work for, and she took it without looking up, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. She pulled Frey onto the lead diagnostic track that same afternoon. "Palm flat," she told him, guiding his hand down onto a cold housing. "Close your eyes. Stop trying to be smart about it. The metal will tell you if it's cracked or contaminated or fine, but only if you shut up and let it talk. Heat, vibration, the way it gives under your hand and the way it doesn't. That is the whole secret. There is not a bigger one hiding behind it. Anybody who tells you there's a bigger one is selling something." Frey closed his eyes, and after a long minute his face changed. The small, stunned change of a young man feeling a thing he had not known a person could feel through his own hand. And across the bay, Sergeant First Class Dwight Pruitt watched his overlooked specialist learn something real, something that could not be faked or bought or bluffed. And he pulled a recommendation form out of the desk drawer and started filling it out himself in his own blocky hand. His first honest act as the leader he had spent 20 years only pretending, very convincingly, to be. If this one landed for you, if you have ever watched the right person be underestimated and wanted, more than almost anything, to be in the room when everybody finally understood, then subscribe to Honor Tales. These are stories about the people who never once had to raise their voice to be right, and about the ones who were lucky enough, in the end, to learn how to listen to them. Dusk came down slow and orange over the yard. One after another, the deadlined vehicles rolled out of the bay under their own power. The first 3 by that evening, engines catching clean and settling into an even idle gear oil running the way it was always meant to run. 14 down had become 11, then 8, then 5, the number falling all afternoon like weather breaking. The movement would make its date now. The bay emptied out slow, mechanics heading for the barracks and the chow hall, calling good nights across the yard, and the big shop went quiet around a single lamp. Pruitt stayed late, alone at the control desk under that one lamp, a torque procedure open in front of him, reading it line by line by line, the way a man reads something he has finally, at 50, decided to actually understand, instead of merely enforce. Learning. No one made him stay. No one was left to watch him do it, which is the only reason it counted. And Jo Marsh stood in the middle of her new bay in the settling dark, sleeve pushed up, and ran her thumb slow over 2 small letters inked low on the inside of her forearm, beside a crest that most of the men who had earned it were not alive to wear anymore. RM. No phone buzzed in her pocket. No coded greeting came in from a call sign that was supposed to be dead. No secure message. No foreign port city. No ghost from a war that would not stay finished. None of that came, and none of it was coming, and she was not waiting for it. No message came. No call sign from a war that was supposed to be over. Just the tick of a cooling engine somewhere in the yard, and a name she carried on her wrist, in a bay that had finally started to run the way a bay is supposed to run. Some stories do not need a sequel. They just need, once, to end true. She pulled her sleeve back down over the crest and the 2 small letters, turned off the last lamp, and she walked out into the yard, past the vehicles she had brought back to life, sitting quiet in the dark and waiting for morning. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.